16 serial killers randomly placed into brackets. Who will survive Serial Killer Combat 1? First up, the number 1 seed, John Joseph Joubert versus number 16, Emmanuel Webb.
John J. Joubert, a former airman, repeatedly stabbed and slashed Danny Joe Eberly, 13, and Christopher Walden, 12, in Bellevue near Offutt Air Force Base, where he was stationed. He was also convicted of stabbing and strangling a boy in Maine. In trying to explain the crimes, Mr. Joubert, who was 33 at the time, told the Omaha World Herald it was the power and the domination and seeing the fear that was more excited than actually causing harm.
Okay, and then you have Emmanuel Webb. He was arrested and sentenced to 20 years for the involuntary manslaughter of Evelyn Charity, who was 37. Webb claims she died during wild sex in Mount Vernon, Georgia. He was released on parole in 2001. While serving time in a Georgia correctional facility for parole violation in 2006, Bridgeport, Connecticut police charged him with the 1993 murder of Elizabeth Gandy, who was 34. DNA evidence linked him to 4 other murders, but he was only charged in 3. 3 of the women were mutilated or disfigured, including one who was stabbed in the neck, chest, forehead, and stomach, police said. Each of the crimes had a sexual aspect. So here we got John versus Emmanuel. And think of this as the movie Condemned. They're kind of stranded on an island, and you know what's going to happen. So John, and you didn't mention it in your profile of him, but he had a bad childhood.
It seems like it, whenever you expand the reading on him. His parents divorced whenever he was 6.
He grew to hate his controlling mother.
Yeah, he went to live with her in Lawrence, Massachusetts. He wasn't allowed to visit his father and grew to hate her. And then in 1974, she moved the family to Portland, Maine. Now, in 1971, Joubert's mother moved them out of their house and into a rundown apartment. And I believe at this time, this is probably whenever he started to feel like he was an outcast, he was getting in trouble in school, joined up with the Boy Scouts, and then he really started having these weird fantasies.
Became an Eagle Scout, though. Does that matter to you?
I mean,
little dedication there.
Right. It's not easy to get your Eagle Scout. It's a lot of time, a lot of commitment. I don't know how it fits into the whole story of him. It's just he had this weird, for some reason, assaulting typically young girls. He got physical arousement out of it, like sexual arousement. It's very strange to me. He stabbed one girl with a pencil and enjoyed it as she cried out in pain. Another little girl, he rode by her on his bike and then slashed her with a razor. And he found all that enjoyable. That's strange. He did that stuff whenever he was 13. And he never got caught for any of it.
So then you look at Emmanuel Webb, who is basically targeting women, kind of doing the sexual thing.
Right. I think he was a little more calculated because he would target typically drug abusers, and he would have sex with them, and then he would kill them either during or after sex. The weird story about him was the one that he got charged with was the 1993 murder of Evelyn Charity. So he said that they had a wild night of sex, and then it was so wild she died from it, right? But he strangled her while he was having sex with her. So he gets caught for that one. Serves some time, gets out on parole. But the weird backstory is whenever he was younger, and I'm not sure if it was the 80s or the early 90s, but he went and lived in Bridgeport, Connecticut with his sister, and then there was a rash of murders out there. They thought that he might have been connected to as many as 10 of them, but he got charged with 4. One of them they couldn't make stick, so he was convicted on 3 of those murders. The strange thing was at the time, usually these, like I said, these women were drug users, and all the bodies were found in rundown areas of town. The east side of Bridgeport, I guess, is really bad. The DNA evidence wasn't that good at the time, so they had to wait till down the road once he got busted on a parole violation for the murder of Evelyn Charity, or the manslaughter. That's whenever they got him. I guess they did a DNA swab on him, and he had 4 of them that hit inside their database. And so he was charged with those other murders as well.
And the women were mutilated, disfigured, stabbed in the neck, chest, forehead, and stomach.
Right. He really had a hatred there.
Two similar type of killers, though.
Very
it's just
true.
One with a sexual aspect versus one that just wanted to kind of have the power and domination.
Right, but he got aroused by that power, and there was a sexual component to his crimes too.
So how do you differ this?
I don't know. I mean,
one doesn't stand out more than the other.
With Emmanuel Webb, he would target women, usually pretty defenseless. If they're high and he's having sex with them, they're in pretty vulnerable positions. But with Joubert, he went after kids. You know, that all of his murders were kids, preteens. Man, I'm not real sure. Both of them are pretty vulnerable, women and children.
Low-hanging fruit.
Very low-hanging fruit.
If I'm talking crazier, I'm going Emmanuel Webb here.
I would probably go with Emmanuel Webb too, just because he seemed pretty vicious. I think with Joubert, it was a little more psychological with him. I think he got off on the power of it, where I think Webb just wanted to mutilate something.
He finished the job, whereas Joubert, you said, would ride by someone, nick him with a razor and be good with kind of the reaction of it.
Yeah.
Maybe Webb took it to the next level and finished the job. So we both have the 16th seed, Emmanuel Webb, moving on.
I think that's a pretty fair assumption.
Let's get to the next match. All right, next we have the 8th seed, Carol Edward Cole versus the 9 seed, Thomas Crump.
So Carol Edward Cole was born in Sioux City, Iowa. Shortly after his younger sister was born, the family moved to California, where his father found work in a shipyard. Not long after that, World War II started, so his dad got sent off to war. While his father was away, his mother had several affairs and sometimes took Cole along to her rendezvous, threatening to beat him if he told his father. His mother was very emotionally abusive towards him, would sometimes dress him as a girl at school. His classmates all teased him about his girl name. And then finally, at the age of 8, I think that's whenever some stuff started to peak for him. So that's whenever he retaliated against one of his classmates, a boy named Dwayne. He was the same age. He drowned him in a lake in Richmond, California. So that's kind of where it started. Now, at the time, I believe they said it was an accidental death. It wasn't until later, whenever he was in prison, that he admitted to actually drowning the kid. As a teen, Carol Edward Cole committed several petty crimes. He was frequently arrested for drunkenness and minor thefts. After high school, he joined the Army, but he was discharged on bad conduct for stealing pistols. In 1960, Cole attacked a couple parked in cars on a lover's lane. He spent time in various mental hospitals over the next 3 years. One of them was Stockton State Hospital. He seems to be afraid of the female figure and cannot have intercourse with her first, but must kill her before he can do it. Dr. Weiss, who was this doctor at Stockton State Hospital, that's what he wrote about Carol Edward Cole. There they diagnosed him with antisocial personality disorder. Upon his release, he moved to Dallas, Texas, where his brother Richard was living. There he met and married an alcoholic stripper named Billy Whitworth. So a guy with a girl's name and a girl with a guy's name.
Yeah.
Carol and Billy.
It was to be.
Interesting. After 2 years, the marriage ended when Cole burned down a motel after convincing himself that Whitworth was having sex with men there. As a result, he was arrested for arson.
Wait, an alcoholic stripper was having sex with other men?
I've never heard of it. Never heard of it. Upon his release, he attempted to strangle an 11-year-old girl in Missouri. He was arrested and sentenced to 5 years in prison. After that sentence was up, Cole ended up in Nevada, where he attempted to strangle 2 more women. Once again, he checked himself into the mental hospital. The doctors there noted his murderous fantasies, but still elected not to detain him, and he was given a ticket back to San Diego.
A lot of attempted strangulations.
What's interesting is whenever you read up on this, there was actually so many red flags that authorities and doctors and all these people that came into contact with him never put two and two together. They just kind of did the good old boy system and let them go with warnings and tickets. And
you'll see a lot of this decades ago, 30, 40, 50 years ago.
Right.
It's going to be a lot harder to get away with that now.
Well, because people are pretty sadistic. You know, that type of system where they just let you go compared to you have a bigger population with a lot more murders now. So a lot of forensics have improved. So Cole's first victim was an adult named S.E.L. Buck, who he picked up in a San Diego bar in 1971. He strangled her to death in his car and drove around with her body in the trunk before eventually dumping it. In July of 1973, Cole married barmaid Diana Fay Younglove Paschal. What the hell kind of name is that? In July 1973...
She was an alcoholic.
Right. They argued and fought frequently, and Cole regularly went off on his own for days at a time. He would commit murders while he was away, including one woman he allegedly cannibalized to a degree. In September 1979, Cole strangled Paschal to death. A suspicious neighbor called the police 8 days later, but although they found Paschal's body wrapped in a blanket and stuffed in a closet, they decided that she had died because of her heavy drinking, and Cole was released without charges after questioning. See, that's just a weird pattern. So then he leaves San Diego. He moved around a little bit again. 1979, he met Marie Cushman at a bar in Vegas. That same evening, the two went to a motel where they had sex, and then he killed her by strangulation. So that's Carol Edward Cole for you.
Number 9, Thomas Crump. June of 1982, while a prisoner at the Torrance County Jail, Robert Earl Davis assisted the serial murderer Thomas Crump to escape from the jail. Escapee Thomas Crump used a car owned by Davis's wife in exchange for a promise that Crump would kill Davis's enemies on the outside. It was alleged that those former cops he committed those crimes with, along with some of the judicial officers involved, had become targets for Davis while he was sitting in prison. This man, cruel destroyer, born in 1940, Thomas Crump was identified to be one of America's serial killers, as he has been connected to many crimes as a lethal stone-cold killer and drifter who left his deadly footprints across America in the 1980s. Convicted in Albuquerque, New Mexico, of killing his second wife, a cab driver, and a Minnesota tourist, Crump was already serving life on those counts when he confessed to an October 1980 murder in Vegas. Jody Jameson, who was 25, had been working for a local escort service when she died in a sleazy motel, strangled with a torn pillowcase, her body left in a bathtub. Convicted and sentenced to die on the basis of his own confession, Crump has also confessed to 7 other slayings, 7 attempted murders, plus an unspecified number of robberies, assaults, and kidnappings. As the story was told on October 4th, 1980, the body of Jody Jameson was discovered in a motel room bathtub in Vegas, with her arms and legs tightly bound with loose-fitting pantyhose. Crump additionally confessed he had participated in a prison kidnapping in which the prison guard had been taken hostage and killed. In 1984, the jury convicted Crump of first-degree murder and robbery, both with the use of a deadly weapon, which is a murder conviction. The jury found 3 aggravating circumstances. The first was a murder committed by a person who had a previous conviction for another murder or felony. The second was a murder was committed while the person was engaged in the after committing a robbery, and third, aggravating commission of a flight circumstance to warrant the death penalty. Now, that's a whole lot of, legal jumbo that we can't get into. Now, that was AssociatedContent.com did all that. A 4-time convicted murderer died inside of a Nevada prison more than 30 years after being first sentenced to die for strangling an escort. Although Crump, who was 78, he confessed to the killings of 7 people and attempted killings of 7 others, he said, "I'm not making any excuses. I don't feel compassion for the victims or anything that I've done. Why? I don't know. I have no idea. I've searched for that why for so many years." And for those he attempted to kill, the newspaper reported he would have finished the job if he had known that they had even survived his attack. All right, let's recap. Crump versus Cole.
So with Cole, I kind of feel, because whenever you get into his conviction, in 1981, he was convicted of the 3 murders in Texas. He was sentenced to life in prison at the Huntsville prison. So in 1984, his mother died, and they said that his attitude had reportedly changed drastically. He agreed to face further murder charges filed in Nevada, even though it could possibly mean the death penalty. And this is where the story gets really interesting about Cole. In February 1984, he was extradited to Nevada, where he was tried and convicted for the strangulation deaths of 2 women in 77 and 79. In October of 1984, Cole was sentenced to death in Nevada. Whenever he was sentenced, he reported to have said, "Thanks, Judge." Anti-death penalty campaigners, including the American Civil Liberties Union, tried to have his sentence commuted, but Cole actually protested this. He actually waived his right to a jury trial. He wanted a trial by the judge. And typically whenever you do that, you have a much higher chance of getting the death penalty. So
that's what he wanted.
He knew that what he had done was wrong, and I think that he wanted to die. He knew that he was never going to get out of prison, so he just wanted to be done with it all.
Whereas Crump escaped prison. He found his way out. He wanted out. He wanted to do more dirt, more bad stuff. But he also confessed to double of what they had on him.
Well, he seems pretty indifferent to the crimes that he committed, whereas with Cole, I think it stemmed from he hated women because he hated his mom. You know, just like they said in his psychiatric exams that he couldn't have sex with a woman unless she was dead. He had to kill him first, which is strange. Necrophilia. But I think that whole thing, once his mother was gone, I think he felt released, and then he wanted to go. Whereas with Crump, he was so indifferent to the crimes, he just didn't care.
It was never going to end until he got caught. And like he said, if I knew they survived, I would have went and killed them.
Right. But he didn't feel any compassion towards the victims at all. He didn't feel anything for them.
Who do you have in this matchup?
I think I got Crump massacring Cole.
I've got Thomas Crump. Next up, 4 seed Saeed Hanaei versus Clifton Ray, the 13th seed.
So Saeed Hanaei, this is our first international killer. He was from Iran. He was born in 1962, and at the time of the murders, he was married and had 3 children. He was a construction worker by trade. Now, the crimes that he committed, he targeted female sex workers in the eastern city of Mashhad. He often targeted drug addicts. The killings were referred to as the spider killings by the Iranian press because Hanaei lured the women to his home and strangled them and dumped their bodies. He killed 16 women between 2000 and 2001 before he was apprehended by the police. So the murders were the following. On August 7, 2000, a 30-year-old woman who had a 9-year-old daughter disappeared. On August 10th, a woman was found strangled beneath a road of Mashhad near some tomato bushes. On August 11th, in a neighborhood of Mashhad, the body of a woman was discovered in a yellow burlap sack. She too had been strangled.
Now that's 3 and 4 days.
He moves pretty quick. On January 3rd, 2001, near the Iran Khodro Company in Mashhad, a woman was found dead. On February 16th, in front of Iran Khodro, the body of a 27-year-old was discovered in a tent. On February 29th, the strangled body of a 45-year-old was discovered near a road. On March 19th, the body of a 50-year-old was discovered in northeastern Mashhad. Her body had been wrapped up in black cloth. On March 23rd, the body of another woman who had been strangled with a scarf was found in the village of Dustabad near Mashhad. On April 12th, the body of a 35-year-old was discovered in a tent on the edge of a road in Mashhad. On April 14th, the body of a 35-year-old strangled woman was found wrapped up in a tent. The following day, another 35-year-old woman was discovered in a similar position. On April 24th, the body of a 31-year-old was discovered in Mashhad. On July 3rd, the body of a 28-year-old was discovered at a boulevard in Mashhad, along with the bodies of 2 women. All 3 were strangled. On July 11th, the body of a 20-year-old was found in Mashhad. On July 24th, the body of an 18-year-old was found. In August, the body of a 33-year-old was found. The last victim of the so-called, by the media, spider killer was found. His motives were primarily focused on the ideal that he was helping cleanse the city of moral corruption. He claimed in court that he began killing the sex workers after his wife was mistaken for one.
So he had a little bit of a code he was trying to go by.
Following Hanaei's arrest, hardliners began to campaign in his support, arguing that he had tried to clean the city of corruption. The Kayhan Daily reported that many in Mashhad had been happy with the killings. Another report said a lawyer had volunteered to defend him. Who is to be the judge, wrote the conservative newspaper. Those who look up to eradicate the sickness of those who stand at the root of the corruption. Such sentiments were expressed by the killer's merchant friends at the Mashhad Bazaar, one of whom said with a laugh, "He did the right thing. He should have continued." So he was found guilty and hanged at dawn on April 8, 2002 in Mashhad prison.
We'll move on to Clifton Ray. Prosecutors say the conviction of a man in a 1990 strangling case ends a serial killer's career. A Jackson County jury convicted Clifton Ray on Friday of strangling Joycey Flowers, 17 years to that day. His only possible sentence for first-degree murder is life without parole. Ray was about to be paroled 3 years ago after a 1995 conviction for strangling his neighbors, but prosecutors used DNA evidence to charge him with the 87 murder of Deborah Taylor and the 90 murder of Flowers. In both cases, the women were strangled, and semen with DNA matching Ray's was found in or on them. The Taylor murder case is pending. Ray is a suspect in about 6 other murders. After the verdict on that Friday, a prosecutor told jurors that Ray's DNA matched that on Taylor and another victim, but charges could not be filed in that case because samples mistakenly were destroyed. Prosecutors said that Ray killed Flowers around May 24th, 1990. Her body was found in a homeless camp. After the verdict, Flowers' daughter, Janelle Flowers of Kansas City, cried on the shoulders of Assistant Prosecutor Dan Miller. She said she can rest in peace now. Praise God. Miller said, "It's about time. I don't know what else to say." Prosecutors had argued unsuccessfully before trial that Flowers and Taylor's homicides were linked by DNA and should be tried together. But the judge ruled that the Missouri case law does not allow the use of DNA as a sole reason to try cases together. The defense argued that Flowers and Ray may have had sex, but that did not prove that Ray killed her. Bell argued that another man may have killed Flowers after Ray had sex with her. An earlier trial had ended in a hung jury when 2 juries agreed with the defense argument. Miller said that he would try Ray for Taylor's homicide, and he predicted that Missouri laws soon would allow cases to be linked on DNA evidence, which some states already allow. Kansas City, Missouri. That's where we're at. So, recap. There's not a whole lot on Clifton Ray to go here. He basically had sex with women and he strangled them and killed them. That's the gist of it. Now, your guy, Saeed, was very active. He had a code. He killed early and often.
Yeah, sometimes it was, within 24 hours apart, he was off to murder somebody else.
I don't know that this is much of a conversation here.
Yeah, there's just not a whole lot on Clifton Ray. And I mean, even with the hung jury, where was the evidence to prove that he actually murdered? Well, which one was it? Flowers?
Yeah. I mean, the whole DNA thing in Missouri state law, it's a little weird. It was in or around the victims.
Right. Now, if there's
the defense
multiple,
was trying to say, well, maybe someone else had sex with this girl right after he did and killed her.
True. Maybe her husband or boyfriend found out what had happened. And
yeah, maybe it was a train or whatever. And
exactly. But if it's multiples that had his semen in them or on them, and died of the same manners, probably he did it.
Now, if these guys were both on an island like the condemned, I don't know if I'm going against Saeed on this one.
I don't know if I would either. He would He would go balls to the wall just because that's his moral code. This
Yes.
man is obviously corrupt. You know, a loose man sleeping with loose women. We can't have that on the island.
Right.
We have to murder them.
I'm going the 4 seed Saeed.
I'm going with Saeed as well.
Up next, the number 5 seed Dennis Rader versus the number 12 seed Raymont Hopewell.
Dennis Lynn Rader. He was an American serial killer known as BTK for Bind, Torture, Kill, or the BTK Strangler or the BTK Killer. Between 1974 and 1991, Rader killed 10 people in Wichita and Park City, Kansas, and sent taunting letters to police and newspapers describing the details of his crimes. After a decade-long hiatus, Rader resumed sending letters in 2004, leading to his 2005 arrest and subsequent guilty plea. He is serving 10 consecutive life terms at El Dorado Correctional Facility in Prospect Township, Butler County, Kansas.
That's funny. He sent all those letters in like the 70s, 80s, and 90s, right? And then the second he sends one in the 2000s, he's caught.
Right, kind of dumb.
It's just how things happen. Things evolve.
Well, forensic analyzation of evidence tends to get a little bit better over time. So I have no idea what would prompt this guy other than ego to come out of the shadows after like 10, 15 years of nothing and then sending letters again. How dumb. But Rader was born on March 9th, 1945. His brothers were Paul, Bill, and Jeff. So they think he was either born in Columbus or Pittsburgh, Kansas, but he grew up in Wichita. Both parents worked long hours and paid little attention to their children at home. Rader later described feeling ignored by his mother in particular and resenting her for it. I'm seeing a theme with a lot of these serial killers that I get. They really hate their moms. From a young age, Rader harbored sadistic sexual fantasies about torturing trapped and helpless women. He also exhibited zoosadism by torturing, killing, and hanging small animals. Rader acted out sexual fetishes for voyeurism, autoerotic asphyxiation, and cross-dressing. He often spied on female neighbors while dressed in women's clothing, including women's underwear that he had stolen and masturbated with, ropes or other bindings around his arms and neck. Kind of a weirdo. Years later, during his cooling-off periods between murders, Rader would take pictures of himself wearing women's clothing and a female mask while bound. He later admitted that he was pretending to be his victims as part of a sexual fantasy. However, Rader kept his sexual proclivities well hidden, and he was widely regarded in his community as a normal, polite, and well-mannered. Rader attended Kansas Wesleyan University after high school, but received mediocre grades and dropped out after 1 year. He served in the U.S. Air Force from 66 to 70, and upon discharge, he moved to Park City, where he worked in the meat department of a Leaker's IGA supermarket, where his mother was a bookkeeper. On January 15, 1974, 4 members of the Otero family were murdered in Wichita, Kansas. The victims were Joseph Otero, age 38, Julie, 33, Joseph Jr., age 9, and Josephine, age 11. Their bodies were discovered by the family's 3 older children who had been at school at the time of the killings. After his 2005 arrest, Rader confessed to killing the Otero family. Rader wrote a letter that had been stashed inside an engineering book in the Wichita Public Library in October of 1974, which described in detail the killing of the family in January of that year. Between the spring of 1974 and winter 1977, Rader killed 3 more women, and he sent another letter to television station KAKE in Wichita claiming responsibility for the murders of the Oteros, the 3 women, and he suggested names for himself. He also intended to kill others, such as Anna Williams, who in 1979 was age 63, escaped death by returning home much later than expected. Rader explained during his confession that he became obsessed with Williams and was absolutely livid when she evaded him. He spent hours waiting at her home, but became impatient and left when she did not return home from visiting friends. Maureen Hedge, aged 53, was found on May 5, 1985 at East 53rd Street in Wichita. Rader killed her on April 27th and took her dead body to his church, the Christ Lutheran Church, where he was the president of the church council. There, he photographed her body in various bondage positions. Rader had previously stored black plastic sheets and other materials at the church in preparation for the murders. and then later dumped the body in a remote ditch. He called his plan Project Cookie. In 1988, after the murders of 3 members of the Fager family in Wichita, a letter was received from someone claiming to be the BTK killer, in which the author of the letter denied being the perpetrator of the Fager murders. The author credited the killer with having done admirable work. It was not proven until 2005 that this letter was, in fact, written by Rader. He is not considered by police to have committed this crime. His final victim, Dolores E. Davis, was found on February 1st, 1991 in Park City. Rader killed her on January 19th. Rader was arrested while driving near his home in Park City shortly after noon on February 25th, 2005. An officer asked Mr. Rader, "Do you know why you're going downtown?" He replied, "Oh, I have suspicions why." Wichita Police, the Kansas Bureau of Investigation, the FBI, and ATF agents searched Rader's home and vehicle, seizing evidence including computer equipment, a pair of black pantyhose retrieved from a shed, and a cylindrical container. The church he attended, the office at City Hall, and the main branch of the Park City Library were also searched. At a press conference the next morning, Wichita Police Chief Norman Williams announced, "The bottom line, BTK is arrested."
Number 12, Raymont Hopewell. A man accused of killing 5 mostly elderly people since '99 pled guilty Friday to murder, rape, and other offenses in connection with the crimes. Hopewell, who's 35, pled guilty to 5 murders, 4 rapes, and other crimes to avoid the death penalty. He also faces numerous other concurrent sentences, including life and several 25-year and 20-year prison terms. Hopewell was charged with first-degree murder and assault in the murders. The victim ranged in age of 60 to 88. Hopewell, who has a history of arrests for burglary, theft, drug possession, and other charges, was convicted on a drug dealing charge in 2004 and given an 18-month sentence. He walked away from a halfway house in Baltimore. He was arrested in September in the death of Carlton Crawford, who was 82, a deaf man who was beaten and strangled. Hopewell was indicted in January in the February 1999 rape and murder of Constance Willis, who was 61, and the murder of Sarah Shannon, who was 88, the murder of Sadie Mack, who was 78, and the August 2005 rape and murder of Lydia Winfield, who was 78. Police documents show that the DNA evidence links Hopewell to all 5 killings, 3 of which involve rape, and the rape of a woman who lived. DNA also was recovered at the sites of the other 2 killings. The crime spree targeted older people, most of whom had a connection to Hopewell or his family. His victims would willingly let him in, and once inside, he used a knife to threaten residents. All right, let's recap Dennis versus Raymont. Now, we live in the Midwest. This BTK killer was actually a really big deal when we were a little bit younger.
Right. That was national news in 2005. Right? That was a big deal that they had caught the BTK killer. And with Dennis Rader, he's definitely a weirdo. You know, why would you take somebody that you just murdered to your church so that you can bind them up and then take pictures of them? And that's just very odd behavior. But also, even at his sentencing, he didn't talk, and the judge entered a not guilty plea for him. That was on May 3rd. But on June 27th, the scheduled trial date, Rader changed his plea to guilty, and then he described the murders in details and made no apologies, which is quite strange.
So something had to happen between then and...
I'm not real sure, because I think he kind of got off bragging about what he'd done. I mean, why would you send these letters out to media and to police, taunting them?
Well, and then the gap in between the letters. He didn't feel important or no longer...
I think that he had an ego that needed to be satisfied with people scurrying around trying to find out who's done this.
And that's what got him.
Right. I think he got a thrill off of knowing that he was hiding in the shadows and they didn't know who he was.
Dressed in women's clothing, was into bondage. Now Raymont, on the other hand, this is low-hanging fruit, as we talked about. elderly people that knew him that would let him in, did disgusting things to him.
Right. Why are you raping 70 and 80-year-old women? I mean, I understand why you'd target them. Just like you said, low-hanging fruit. It's hard for them to fight back. Virtually no strength. Hard enough just to walk.
In this fictional world podcast we're doing, I don't see even Raymont targeting Dennis Rader. But, Rader's a little odd, too. It's not a hard one because Raymont really, really is targeting low-hanging fruit.
Right. Well, and it was people that he knew, so that he knew that they would let him in, and it wouldn't be an issue for him to gain access to him pretty easily. But with Dennis Rader, he obviously went through a massive planning phase. He even had a name for it, Project Cookie. I mean, that's just...
Yeah.
If they're going to fight, Rader's definitely planning this out.
Yeah. So what are some of the media stuff that made him infamous? Because I know people have made books loosely regarding him.
So there was a forensic psychologist named Catherine Ramsland that she compiled confessions of a serial killer from her 5-year correspondence with Rader. There's been multiple works that have drawn off the cases, or the case against Dennis Rader. Stephen King had a novella, A Good Marriage, and the film based on it were inspired by the BTK killer. Novelist Thomas Harris has said that the character of Francis Dolarhyde in his 1981 novel Red Dragon is partially based on the then unidentified BTK killer. Episode 4 of Season 6, Law & Order, SVU, based on the case of Dennis Rader. Episode 15 of Season 1 of Criminal Minds is based on the Rader murders. A character based on Rader played by actor Sonny Valicenti appears in the Netflix series Mindhunter. Kane Hodder portrays Rader in the 2008 movie BTK. The film is a half biopic and half fictionalized account of the murders. The assassin from the movie The Clove Hitch Killer was inspired by Dennis Rader, and thrash metal band Exodus wrote a song entitled BTK, which was inspired by Dennis Rader's crime history.
Okay, so I mean, going off all this, one guy is very infamous. The other guy is not so much, but I think I'm moving Dennis Rader along here. Just on planning, like you said, and he's cerebral.
A little more cerebral about his case.
What do you got?
I got Dennis Rader.
Stay tuned to the second half of the first round matchups of Serial Killer Combat 1.